Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to also oppose this bill. While the explanatory statement describes this bill as being of a merely technical nature, and that was what we were also told in our briefings, I must be clear, just because something fixes a technicality does not mean we should pass it if it's fundamentally flawed. I am in strong support of looking after our young people, especially our most vulnerable, and like every single person in this chamber, I recognise the critical importance of education and that every single child has a right to appropriate education. But this bill, which seeks to enshrine school attendance officers into legislation, will not achieve that goal. I thank the member for Fanny Bay for sharing her extensive experience in working in this space. I was heartened to hear her say that what we need is to work with families and address barriers to education. But I've not seen anything about that in this bill. This bill is about, as described in the explanatory statement, streamlining and improving existing enforcement practices. And Madam Speaker, there is no evidence that fining parents improves school attendance in the long term. This bill will not achieve what we need, which is to make sure that the significant percentage of children who are currently disengaged from the education system are able to be part of it. Our education system should be for all children. We need to address why kids aren't going to school and why kids aren't staying there, and then implement solutions to address this. Penalising parents with fines of up to $2,775 under the guise of improving attendance is a punitive approach that risks criminalising parents, particularly Aboriginal and low-income families who already struggle to make ends meet. A fine of even $370 at the lower end is significant for families in the Northern Territory. We know many of whom live in remote or economically disadvantaged areas. For these families, fines like this may mean cutting back on food, housing or other basic needs, creating further hardship. And we also know, for those unable to pay, that consequences escalate, leading to more severe penalties. This approach doesn't address the root causes of absenteeism. It only punishes those who are already struggling the most. We may not need to look for evidence that education is important, as the member for Fong Lim said, but we do need to look for evidence about whether or not this approach will work. And I did search for that evidence and I found none. A report from the Indigenous Health and Policy Framework highlights that penalising families for absenteeism is ineffective and can actually worsen outcomes for students. A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that punitive measures, including fines, might lead to a short-term increase in attendance but do not sustain long-term engagement with the education system. Research by the Australian Institute of Family Studies, Children's Educational Outcomes, the Role of Parents' Financial Stress, highlights that fines disproportionately affect low-income families, exacerbating financial stress and potentially leading to more significant social issues without improving attendance rates. And in Victoria, after implementing fines for non-attendance, they saw minimal improvement in attendance rates, while families reported increased anxiety and disengagement from the school system, as noted by studies conducted by the University of Melbourne. The UK Department of Education reported that fining parents for school non-attendance did not lead to a significant increase in attendance. Instead, schools that focused on engagement and support saw more substantial and lasting improvements. Punishing parents, particularly from vulnerable communities, does not make their children any more likely to attend school. In fact, as we can see from all of that research, it may further alienate families from the education system and deepen the distrust between schools and communities. This approach overlooks the root causes of poor attendance, such as poverty, health problems and lack of engagement with school. Research shows us that coercive measures alone do not create lasting changes without parallel efforts to engage students and their families in the educational process. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, recommends that improving school attendance requires addressing barriers such as socio-economic status, mental health and family circumstances rather than punitive measures. And we've heard from members in this chamber that what we need to do is work with communities and families to make sure that our education is culturally appropriate. Real investment in community involvement, cultural sensitivity and a focus on relationships, as seen in local developments, in local decision-making initiatives and community-led education reforms that we have had in the past in the Northern Territory, are crucial elements that need to be integrated into any strategy that's aimed at improving school attendance in a sustainable way. And rather than investing in this approach that does address the real issues behind school absenteeism, such as lack of resources, inadequate school environments and cultural disengagement, the Northern Territory Government's prioritising a punitive approach using language like patrols, compliance and enforcement. This approach views families as suspects, not as partners. It sees them as problems to be solved through penalties and control rather than working together to find lasting solutions. In fact, this approach echoes a broader punitive mindset which ignores the fundamental role of trust and collaboration between schools and the communities they serve. We've heard about Catherine High today, and I've got many friends in Catherine who've talked about what's happening at Catherine High and say it's an amazing school and it's certainly doing their best, but it clearly does not have the resources to meet the needs of the young people attending, and as a result, both students and teachers are feeling unsafe there. If the CLP government were genuinely concerned about improving school attendance, they would be focusing on building relationships, not on imposing fines. They will be allocating resources to underfunded schools in remote and disadvantaged areas. They will be ensuring that children have the support they need to succeed. They will be working alongside community-led organisations to understand the real reasons why children are disengaging from school, and then they would work to address those reasons, not punish families for them. The government should be investing in wraparound services that we need so desperately in our community, mental health support and transportation assistance, family engagement programs that can help parents engage with their children's education in a positive and meaningful way. We all want our children to succeed. We all want them to have the opportunity to get a good education. But this is not the answer. Madam Speaker, this bill is not the way forward for the Northern Territory. We are failing our children and we do need real solutions. We need to invest in education, and if the government truly wants to improve school attendance and educational outcomes, it must stop looking for ways to punish families and start looking for ways to support them. We must put children first, always. Their education, safety and future cannot be sacrificed to political expediency or punitive policies. Our children deserve better and we must deliver. Thank you, Madam Speaker.